Well, it's a joy to be here with all of you on this Independence Day weekend when we pay tribute to the many, many servicemen and women who have fought for this country. And I'd like to share with you a very special group of veterans from the 1940s to whom I owe a great deal. They're my heroes. And let me tell you a little bit about them. When Pearl Harbor was bombed on December 7th, 1941, all young Americans rushed to the recruitment offices to serve our country. And like all Americans, young Japanese American men and women went to those recruitment offices. But what happened to them was a unique and singular experience. They were rejected for service and labeled enemy non-aliens. American citizens. Non-aliens are American citizens. And we were labeled enemies simply because we happened to look like the people who bombed Pearl Harbor. After Pearl Harbor, Japanese Americans were looked at with fear and suspicion and with hatred. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which ordered all Americans of Japanese ancestry on the West Coast to be rounded up and put into barbed wire internment camps in some of the most hellish places in this country: the blistering hot desert of Arizona, the sultry, humid swamps of Arkansas, the cold, windswept high plains of Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, and Colorado. We were imprisoned with no charges, no due process, no trials, simply because of our ancestry. But a year into internment, the government realized that there was a wartime manpower shortage. And so as suddenly as they rounded us up, they opened up the military for service by young Japanese Americans. And the astounding thing is, after a year of imprisonment, thousands of young Japanese American men and women volunteered from behind those barbed wire fences, leaving their families and loved ones in imprisonment, and put on the same uniform as that of the sentries that guarded over us. They were put into a segregated all-Japanese American unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. They chose as their regimental motto, "Go for broke." They were determined to give it their all to prove their Americanism. And give it their all they did. They fought with amazing courage and valor and heroism on those bloody battlefields of Italy, France, and ultimately Germany. They sustained the highest combat casualty rate of any unit of its size in the Second World War. In one battle alone, the battle to rescue the Lost Battalion, a battalion of Texans that was surrounded by the Nazis and totally isolated. 2,000 men of the Japanese American unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, went in to rescue 200 Texans. They engaged them in intense combat for 8 days straight and sustained 1,000 casualties to save those 200 Texans. They saved them, and they received 2 Presidential Unit citations for that heroic effort. By April of 1945, the Allied advance on the Nazis had been stopped at the Gothic Line. This was an impregnable mountain fortress embedded with the toughest Nazi SS division. 3 Allied divisions had been pounding away at it for 6 months, and they were stalemated. They brought in the members of the 442nd to create a diversionary attack. The men of the 442nd came up with a bold and dangerous plan. The backside of the Gothic line was a sheer rock cliff, a drop of about 4,000 feet. They decided to do the impossible. The enemy thought an attack from the backside was impossible. The men of the 442nd decided to attack from that side. On a dark, moonless night, they began scaling that rock wall in full combat gear. They climbed all night long. In the darkness, many men lost their footing or their grip and fell to their death in the ravine below. They all fell silently so as not to give away their position. At the first crack of day, they attacked. They took the hill and broke the Gothic line, a 6-month stalemate. They broke that Gothic line in 34 minutes. It was an amazing act of heroism. And there was another group of Japanese Americans in the Pacific Theater. 6,000 young Japanese Americans served on the military intelligence service. They became the eyes and ears of intelligence with their language skills. They were in truly dangerous territory because they looked just like the enemy. The term friendly fire had a deadly real meaning for them. They interrogated prisoners. They translated millions and millions of documents, and they broke enemy codes. And it's believed that the work of the Japanese Americans of the Military Intelligence Service shortened the war by 2 years and saved thousands of Allied lives. The war ended, and they returned from the European theater as the single most decorated unit of the entire Second World War, given its size. There were 21 who received the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military honor that the nation can grant. They were welcomed back on the White House lawn by President Harry Truman, who said to them, "You fought the enemy, but more than that, you fought prejudice and you won." The heroism of the 442nd began a lot of changes, but the most significant change that happened was in 1996, when Congress mandated a re-examination of the records of the veterans who received the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military honor. And upon re-examination, it was found that they were indeed, their acts of heroism were indeed deserving of the highest military honor, the Medal of Honor. And it was only wartime prejudice that had relegated them to the second tier. In the year 2000, I got a very special invitation from the White House. It was an invitation for me to witness the granting of the Medal of Honor to the 21 Japanese Americans who were to receive the Medal of Honor. I sat there in the White House as I heard the names of those men called out. Many of them had passed on by the year 2000. But the men that came forward now were very elderly. Many walked with unsteady steps. A few leaned on canes, and one was in a wheelchair. But I could almost feel the heat of pride coming from them. And I felt an indescribable mix of emotions. Poignance, because it took more than a half a century for these heroes to be recognized for their amazing valor. I felt great pride in their remarkable patriotism. And I felt a deep, profound sense of gratitude to these young men who did amazing deeds under incredible circumstances and made this country, my America, possible. After the ceremony, I went up to them to congratulate them and to thank them for their amazing service. And I asked one of them, how were you able to do what you did when this government treated you and your family so shabbily? And he said to me, well, George, when I was going to school, I began every school day with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I meant every word of it, especially that part that said, with liberty and justice for all. This government didn't think I was American enough. So by gum, I went out there to show them what kind of American I am. And by gum, he showed them. He showed them what an American is made of. An American is defined not by race, but by the ideals that he holds so dear, dear enough to fight for and die for. It was these men, Japanese Americans, who came from barbed wire imprisonment after they had been rejected as enemy non-aliens, that went on to define my America for me. And it is because of them that I can stand before you and join with you in celebrating this Independence Day, the 4th of July, as a proud American. Thank you. That applause can be heard, I'm sure, by all these great heroes. Japanese Americans who fought coming from barbed wire imprisonment, but all the people who served our country so magnificently that we can enjoy an evening like this in freedom and in pride. Thank you very much. Enjoy your Independence Day weekend.